So if you're a PhD student, sooner or later, you're going to receive some harsh feedback on your work. Now this could be a chapter that you've submitted for feedback, it could be a paper for publication, it could be at a really early stage and it's your proposal, or perhaps it could be a presentation that you've given at a conference. Now this happens to everybody at some point, but even knowing that, it can still be quite disheartening or demotivating to spend months or even years working on something and then have it torn apart. Now the only way to completely avoid any risk of really harsh feedback is to never submit anything. And obviously that's not a good long-term strategy. So how do you cope with harsh feedback when it inevitably happens? So before we get to the answers, my name is James Hayton. I'm a recovering physicist, and for the last 10 years, I've been coaching PhD students on writing skills and general PhD survival skills. If you'd like to know more about what I do, then check the links in the description below. So the first thing that we need to do is to move past the undergraduate way of thinking about feedback. So as a PhD student, to reach this stage, you probably did quite well at all the previous stages of the education system, scoring quite highly on all of your previous assessments. But when you reach PhD level, the work that you do is judged to a completely different standard. So you're no longer judged relative to your classmates, but instead you're assessed relative to more professional standards of academic writing. So when a professional academic submits a paper for publication, it's judged to a very high standard with the slightest errors or ambiguity being flagged by the reviewers. The result of this is that often quite good papers can be rejected, and those that are accepted for publication are almost always subject to some kind of revision. Part of the job then is to accept criticism and respond to it professionally. Now, of course, it can still hurt, but we need to move past that initial emotional response and take action. So when you get feedback, what you need to do is make sure that you understand every single specific point of feedback that you receive. This is important, obviously, for practical reasons, because you need to understand the feedback in order to be able to respond to it effectively, but also taking the time to examine each piece of feedback and make sure you understand it also takes some of the edge off emotionally. So you're no longer seeing it as a personal reflection that you're not good enough to do the work or to succeed, but instead you're addressing specific technical points that can make your writing better. So go through the points one by one and seek clarification if necessary. Now this can be difficult if it's a huge piece of work that you've submitted. Unfortunately, many students work in complete isolation and they only get feedback once they have a complete draft. In some cases, this can mean that they go years without any feedback, and in some extreme cases, the first real feedback they get from other academics is the thesis defense, which is obviously not a good situation to be in. So I think it's essential to discuss ideas and show work in progress to other academics, because that way you can spot mistakes early and correct them. And you can learn what kinds of things people are looking for through the questions that they ask. Now, some people might discourage this kind of interaction because supposedly it's better to work everything out for yourself. But for me, this is where you really learn to be an academic. There are some things that are simply impossible to work out on your own without the interaction, without the debate, without the kind of academic sparring that happens when academics pick each other's ideas apart. This is also where you learn to take criticisms or questions and use them to make your work or your arguments stronger. If you're doing that on a regular basis, then it's going to be far easier when you're in a conference situation or your thesis defense, or you're receiving feedback on a paper that you've submitted. But also, if you're doing this on a regular basis, then it's much less likely that there will be major flaws in your work because they should have already been spotted. So this is an ideal situation, but of course, the real world isn't always ideal, and sometimes academics don't necessarily know how to give you constructive, useful feedback. So they will see every tiny little flaw, and they will also maybe have 100 different ideas about how you can make the work better. And you can end up overwhelmed by the information that they give you because they see the technicalities and they see the ideas, but they don't necessarily see you, and they don't necessarily know how to help you to raise the work to the next level. There's a limited amount of information that you can take on board and put into action at any one time. So it's important to be an active participant in the feedback instead of a passive recipient. It's important to clarify what aspects of the feedback are essential and what are just ideas that they've had that you could maybe do. It's also important to clarify what is the priority right now, what is the most important thing to do first, and then also to specify exactly what it is that they require from you. Now, if this isn't 100% clear, then of course you can ask a question, you can say that you don't understand, or you can try to paraphrase their feedback and say to them, so if I understand correctly, what you'd like me to do is, and then whatever it is. This way you get a two-way interaction, you prioritize, and you make sure that you know and you agree exactly what it is that you need to do. So that's it from me. If you like this video, please do check out my website by following the link in the description below. And if you have any questions, any comments, or any requests for future videos, just leave a comment below.